I'm very honored to be facilitating this conversation amongst you who from the two of you from Southern California up here, very active in organizing and as well as creating programming for Iranians in the diaspora, as well as Persian. And so I would like to give you the opportunity to talk a little bit about what you do. Maybe we can go ahead and get started with Nasrin Rahimieh. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm trying not to repeat some of the stuff that I've already said. So look, as the director of the Center for Iranian Culture, or the study of Iranian culture, I'm responsible for putting together programming that interests both the community, that is the Iranian Americans, other kinds of Americans, and also obviously the academic community ourselves. And that poses challenges right away, as you can imagine. But it's always interesting to see what kinds of crowds we get and what kinds of programs draw the attention of the Iranians. And some of it is generational, some of it is a question of course, preferences, personal tastes, and so on. But what I'm interested in, not in terms of imposing any kind of programming, we looked for suggestions from the community. We obviously, the academics themselves who are affiliated with the center make suggestions. But I'm always interested in the ways in which the proposals come to us about, this is a proposal for you, I'd really like you as a representative of Iranian culture to do X or Y. And it's been fascinating for me to see how sometimes, I'm not essentializing the thing, but sometimes, particularly of the older generation, culture is in the singular. Whereas I'd like to think, as someone who really struggles with this definition of culture, and even when we talk about literature, because my area is literature, but the number of community people who come to me and say, "Bah, khanum, in ke adabiyat nist." So I'm interested in that definitive posture, and I'm not sure that it has anything to do with the diaspora, because I have observed my own mother throw a novel that I give her, said, "In roman nist." So there is something about these declarations that, maybe is something cultural about it. But I am also fascinated by the way sometimes we lose the history in that formation, in the struggle to define what we mean by culture and what is the right way of talking about it, that we lose the historical context. And I really always learn more by going back and revisiting the historical context, historicizing even ourselves as we engage in these practices. Those are the kinds of issues that matter for me.
Maybe you can also expand to one of the other questions that we had discussed earlier in terms of what kind of projects, opportunities that you'd like to create in the role that that you haven't had the opportunity to yet.
Yes. Actually, that's one of the issues that I'm going to use an example from Bitarov, because I think it was in their first issue that they published an interview with Hamid Nafisi, and the interviewer is one of my colleagues from film studies at UCI, Sohail Dolatzai. And Sohail, in that discussion, which I love to go visit and revisit repeatedly, because I admire Hamid. His work is fabulous. But in that interview, something happened that really reminded me of one of the things that I would love to work on more. And I don't think I've done enough of this. Well, I haven't done any of it, so let's just stop there. But I think that I've sort of stopped myself from doing that. So he asks, that is, Sohail asks Hamid, some of these experiences that you're describing about the formation of Iranian exile community in LA, the cinema, some of these dynamics were no different from the dynamics that my community experienced. And so Sohail, being someone well informed about post-colonial studies and so on, starts talking about the similarities between these two communities. And didn't we live similar issues? And in the way in which Hamid pushed back in that interview, I was shocked, because I don't expect Hamid. Hamid is very sensitive and in tune with these issues, but Hamid was very definitive and said, no, wait a second, we were very different. We were, I mean, I'm putting words in his mouth. Maybe you can quote it from the issue. But no, the Iranian community did not do this, that, and etc. Now, I'm doing his words, not doing justice. So one of the things that I have talked to Sohail about, he's a very busy man, so is that how about we did the kind of work across these diaspora groups? And that I would love to do, and to bring not just the Persianate world, but other exile communities, that the experience of race, racialization, etc. We have lots in common that we could work on together in terms of panels, artwork, etc.
And there is so much to learn from their experiences as well that would be helpful and perhaps push us forward quite a bit. I think I'm going to turn to you, Persian.
Okay.
I mean, thank you so much for organizing this panel. It's one of a kind for us. We've been here for, I've been here for 30-some years in the Bay Area, and this is definitely the first time that a gathering as such, like-minded people have been together for a discussion. And not just about looking at what's happening now, but also looking to the future and what we can do together. So I'd love to hear your a little bit about your experiences in the past couple of years running this center.
Well, it's not exactly a center, but one of the things that both Nasreen and I can probably speak to is one of the wonderful things about working at a public institution is there is a culture of public discourse. And we can mobilize that public discourse in a way that sometimes an individual artist doesn't have the resources or the space or the collateral of an institution behind it. So, for me, that's one of the great pleasures of this conference, is the idea that I got some money, and this is the moment when I use that money towards something that feels important to me. So I think that's, in the absence of other kinds of institutional support for art, I think universities can do that sort of thing. So I'll make a pitch for public spaces and public institutions, which are really in trouble in this country, and they're really in trouble in California. So it's really important that people support those things as well as the artists who are being supported by public institutions. I'm most interested in collaboration as both an artistic endeavor, but also in the possibility that collaboration creates for creating new things. And I feel like that's really the gift that I've had in terms of doing literature and doing these anthologies. It's twofold. One is building community and building solidarity. And I use that word very consciously because I think sometimes we tend to not see solidarity in art when in fact it's probably one of the most important elements that art can do, is build not just compassion but affinities and solidarities around politics, art, and the right and the invocation of the right to express oneself. And then the other thing I feel really strongly about is that communities sometimes mobilize this idea of voice in ways that sometimes individual voices get out there, but they don't realize that there's a whole set of histories behind the individual voice. And I think a lot of people spoke to that today. So that to me is very exciting. And I think collaborations, and Tarane and I worked on a collaboration, and she's still doing some really wonderful stuff around archives. But I feel like those are the most rewarding things that I've been involved with, is collaborative work and the idea of these anthologies, which Araj also spoke to, like the necessity to have places for artists to show their work, especially at the beginning of their careers. And suddenly they feel like, oh yeah, like I'm not alone. I'm not the only one saying this. This is a place for me to have my voice be heard. And then suddenly, there's a bunch of us who are doing it, and then it becomes louder and more pronounced and then visible. And just as Araj spoke to earlier, for me it was like I was looking for myself all the time in books, and I would read Chinese American literature and think, where is that? And I'm not full Iranian, so I'm half French and
Whatever
that means.
whatever that means, right? But it felt important to me to create that visible identification with a literature. And so I feel like, I'm so pleased, like Biterov is carrying on something, I think, that's motivated by some of the same impulses, but doing really cutting edge stuff. And so I think I feel like I'm part of that older generation. Sepide, where are you? I'm not the same as you, but in some ways I feel like I'm that first generation of people who was sort of pushing out. And I think there's so much great work that's coming ahead of us. And I'm probably like all of you, I'm like at the source of my hope about the relationship between Iran and the U.S. is really about art. Like what possibly could come of that if we weren't dealing with this heaviness about this hostile relationship. It is really a desire to see more exchange between artists.
And Aishan, if you can speak to what it is that you've been, I know that I was reading your bio, and you've been busy doing all kinds of work, so maybe you can expand on that a little bit and tell us a little bit.
I don't know if I can, it might be more fun to show slides than
Definitely.
So
Let's
if
go
I
for
just do that.
I'm a visual person, so.
I don't know if it doesn't work quickly, we can just can it, but and it won't be, I promise this will not take very long. I think if this is going to give me a signal, I'll be okay. I'm a little leery. I teach, and when sometimes I plug in my computer, I think I'm exposed naked to the things on my desktop. I don't intend to be there, but hopefully I haven't done that.
Something is happening.
Okay, good. So I may have to jump around a little bit here, but this may or may not. I don't know why it's doing it this way, but I can do it. I can do it like this. This is well. I begin here. This is sorry. This is a Polaroid. I wish it were not as. You can't really make it out well, but this is a Polaroid that I took of my grandmother, whom I mentioned in the film. If you were here earlier today, and Perseus was kind enough to publish a series of poems that I wrote about my grandparents. They became a kind of watching them became a subject for my writing, and it was, I think, one of the first times that I found myself saying something that wasn't terribly solipsistic and indulgent, and so she's been a muse for me for much of my life, and you can see she's Laura Bakhtiari. She has this amazing appearance with tattoos and very faint tattoos, but she was very special woman, and my artistic life begins, in some sense, part of it begins looking at her and my grandfather Hajara. These are just some images of a documentary project that I worked on that Amy Malik was the instigator of at UCLA. I'm looking at Iranians in Los Angeles, and so the opportunity arose to, sort of look at who are the Iranians in Los Angeles. This is Shaheen Ewalt. He's, who you might say, half Iranian. His mother's Iranian. What are you going to call the father? American, white. These are all sort of charged things. But he runs a record label. Asa, of course, is now quite famous. Good friend of mine. This is Neda. She's a designer, and she's actually she's Baha'i. And one of the great things that came out of this project was to I had an excuse to meet people, and I met people who were of a community that I didn't know much about. And Baha'is in Los Angeles there's a quite tight-knit group, and that was really interesting. This is the son of a friend. I drew upon people in my personal life. This is a poet, Mariam. I wish it's a little dark, but she's Jewish, and it was really important for me to speak to the multiplicity of experiences in Los Angeles. This is Kathy Rose. She runs one of the best jewelry boutiques in Los Angeles. A really wonderful designer. This is my cousin Lola and her daughter Melody. I took this, at a Thanksgiving. This is Samuel Mebasser. His family's actually they're Jewish, but they converted to Christianity, and this is actually at a church where Iranians congregate. And he was very much willing to be photographed, but some of the others were not. And that was a really interesting process of trying to, who could I photograph without belaboring. At one point I was told, oh, you can photograph this person. It turned out that I think he was Arab, Iraqi, but he was a priest at a certain congregation, and they were sort of trying to give me him because he wouldn't be going back to Iran. So you run into these wrinkles and these sort of moves that people make that people are trying to help, but you find, well, you can't necessarily use the subject. Eventually I found someone, so we have the Iranian Christian community represented in this work. This is Ashley Tabador, she's an immigration judge, so she's in a position of power. This is, and this is in front of the federal building. It's a little bit staged, but I make no bones about the subjectivity of what it is that I'm doing in the construction of these portraits, as I call them. This is Ashkan Avami, who's the brother of a really good friend who is also another subject. He's a plastic surgeon. He's a Beverly Hills plastic surgeon. But the key here is he's not just, and I'm sorry, it's rather dark. It's coming through rather dark. You throw a stone in Los Angeles and you'll hit an Iranian doctor or someone who's of Iranian heritage. But okay, who are these people? That's something that's interesting to me. So this work. It happened organically. I met Amy Malik because she was doing her work on diaspora, and she decided to do this project and was aware of what I was doing, and so it came to me. But it came to me because hopefully I've been open to what others in my peer group are doing. Just a few, I spend a significant amount of time in Iran. This is in the bazaar in Esfahan. I spend time in LA photographing all kinds of things. I'm sorry this isn't more organized. This is my partner Masa Tavinia in crime on the music compilations, which is where a lot of my work is in. Again, I'm sorry it's not so, it's rather dark, but these are old Iranian records, Chalapain Dores. This is, part of work that I'm doing on these customized motorbikes. So here's a long on a motorbike. If you pick up the latest Bitarf, you'll see it. This is House of Kabab that I was mentioning to you. That's in LA, and he makes biryani, and see if I can find him. Sorry, this is not organized. But Agha Mehdi, there's a photograph of Agha Mehdi in here. I don't know if maybe I can find it, but I'll point out just a couple other things. You know, there are things, I run into some really interesting conversations, especially this last time with fellow Iranian artists who say, you know, they're really concerned about exotique. Are you exoticizing these things? And, you know, I mean, I know I found that Kiarostami's spent a lot of time, he's obsessed with doors. Well, I'm obsessed with doors. It's not about, you know, the door could be anywhere, but what's going on? You know, what's unique about, what are the phenomenon anywhere that are interesting? I find them in Iran, I find them in Los Angeles. So, you know, I consider something like this and something like this all part of the same practice, you know. But the danger is, you know, if the veil is going to appear, how are you going to treat the veil? You know, I mean, something like this image, there's a lot going on here. And I think context is really important, something that I try to be aware of, but I'm sure I fall into, you know,
maybe you can
things.
address actually how these were exhibited, because it was part of the exhibition that Amy put together.
At the Fowler Museum, UCLA's Fowler Museum, that's right. A lot of these are unpublished, and I'm just accumulating them, and when the opportunity arises, you know, the editors at Bitaro for the core editorial group were open to the Chetori Motori idea. And so I found, you know, that's the beauty of Bitaro, there's a home for some of these things. This, I think, you know, this particular compilation that I worked on, Pomegranates, which is, it's taken on a life of its own. And if you haven't seen it, many of you will be very familiar with things like Kurosh Yagmai's Gol Yakh and Mohammad Nouri's Bia Bar Safar Bandim, Ziya's Helalios. But a lot of people are not familiar with this stuff. And what's interesting about it is that, one of the things that's interesting about it is that this particular compilation has become a kind of place for conversation between young Iranians, if we call them Iranians, that grow up here, that all of a sudden see something contextualized in a certain way. First of all, some of this music is the funkiest music ever made. But you know, how do you talk about funk to someone that doesn't know the term? You know, so I initially talked to my cousin Majid when he was helping me find certain things, because he's a real music aficionado. I'd say, okay, funk مثلا اینطوریه. اگر drum اینطوری باشه، یه خورده ریتمش تون باشه. How do you talk about funk? You know, it's hard. But you know, young Iranians hear this and it's wow. Okay, so you know, they may have certain notions of Iran that are, you know, in line with some of the cliches of Iran, or they've been told something about Iran, or they don't know much about Iran. This becomes, you know, this is cool. This is cool music. And others are saying, you know, people who are not Iranian are saying this is really amazing stuff. So they're excited about it. They bring the record home, they put it on, and then suddenly it's mom and dad, or the mother, or the aunt, or the grandmother come in and say, what you're playing, how do you know that, what, you know, show me this. And it's generated a lot of conversations, and you know, I'm a sentimental person, so I'm not afraid to be sentimental about this, but it has brought families together in certain ways. And one of the most important things for me is that it shows aspects of Iran that we don't often see in these clash of civilization, us and them, east-west dyads that I think are often really specious. And so, you know, but who's doing this work? It turns out that, you know, the people that put this compilation together, myself and Massa, we're raised outside of Iran. And so, I think if you look on the Bitarov did an Indiegogo campaign to raise money for a certain issue, and Arash Davari in a very articulate manner spoke to something that I don't think gets a lot of attention, which is that the contribution, it's not just that we need to hear more from Iranians in Iran. Arash, in one of the fundraising videos, we're driving around Westwood, literally in Tehrangeles, and he's talking to me while I'm filming him. He says that Iranians in diaspora have something to say, that we have a contribution to make, not only for other Iranians in the diaspora, not only for non-Iranians, wherever they may be, but we have a contribution to make to Iran, and that the way in which we look at things, I may be misquoting him, but that there is something that we do that is quite valuable, that's not being done by Iranians in Iran, and also is not being done by Iranians, let's say, that grew up in Iran that are in Los Angeles. So when you look at the typical compilations that come out in that you would buy at Q Market, or you buy at Woodland Hills Market, or you buy at Valley Produce, or you'd buy at Jordan Market, or whatever it is, they're not being packaged with the kind of context and the kind of care that's necessary to attract a broad audience. And I think that that's dangerous. Maybe not dangerous, but it's sometimes it's a shame. And I don't mean that literally. I mean that the history is so rich that we need these things contextualized and presented in a way that's really rigorous. And playing the game in certain ways that, in ways that'll mean something to a variety of audiences. And here's Agha Mehdi. I'll just show you this and one other thing. So you look at this, and you can see, it's sort of blurred in the background, but there's this whole world that this man has constructed for himself in diaspora. I find this really, this image for me is really compelling because he's so compelling. I don't know why it's doing that.
I'd love for you to also talk about the curation that you did for the exhibition. It's an image there.
Yeah, this is.
You can talk about that a little bit. This is an exhibition that is on right now through the month of May. I forget if you can speak to that in Los Angeles.
That's right.
Craft and Folk Art Museum.
Yeah, so there's a show that I worked on with Samira Yamin and Golnar Adili called Displacements, and it's on view at the Craft and Folk Art Museum, which is across from the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. And this is, I studied a lot of different things, but I didn't really study art much. I mean, I did creative writing at one point and have a master's in that, but this was, I saw the need for this show to happen. That's why it happened. And because we're not seeing enough shows of Iranian American artists. So you'll forgive me for jumping around so much, but I find better to show, and say, well, are we seeing the work of Iranian American artists in places like Los Angeles to the extent that we need them? No, really not. I mean, you look at, I don't want to start criticizing, but these institutions really need to respond to this enormous community. And however we may feel about the Cyrus Cylinder exhibition, that was the biggest exhibition in the Getty Villa's history. Displacements, which was one of 3 exhibitions that went on at the museum, we have to give much credit to Shirley Famillion and Timothy Washington. That was what I am told was the biggest opening in the Craft and Folk Art Museum's history. People came out. And there's an audience hungry for this work. And I'll say very briefly that this work is dealing with exile, it's dealing with loss. It's an attempt by both artists to approach those that they've in some sense lost through work that embodies craft practices, that's very, very conceptual, but is really extraordinary in terms of the hand materiality, so that you see Samira Yamin's cutting practices involve meticulous work that involves. I mean, it's really laborious, and Gulnar Adili's work involves a lot of embroidery and stitching. A lot of this is done by hand. The bulk of it is done by hand. And I saw the work, and the work was really remarkable. And a number of us were talking about the affinities between the work. So we did what we could with this show.
I know that we're running really late. We're supposed to end the conference at 5, but there's so many people in the audience that are also organizing and doing, and for many, many years have been engaged in doing this type of work. So the conversation is about challenges that we have, and I'd love to hear from you as well, what kind of challenges you face in doing the type of works that you do. as well as any kind of questions that you may have for the panelists. We have 10-15 minutes, so hopefully you won't keep us up.
Yeah, that's great.
I want to open it up to you. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really thinking about what Nasser Khanum said earlier about the $1 million that a community is able to raise to build a giant statue of Cyrus the Great, and how on the last panel the speaker pointed out that he's having difficulty raising money to teach young people this incredible music, and that's a major discrepancy for me, and I think, back to what you said, Persis, about art being a bridge, I absolutely agree with that. I think it's a great idea. Arash, you're right, there's a hunger for work, but is there support for it financially? People may come to the exhibits, but how can we kind of cultivate communities of support so that the work is can keep going? And any kind of maybe successful models people have discovered in doing that.
Oh, yeah. Well, there is support, because now there are by now more foundations that are, like the Hand Foundation, the Farhang Foundation. I'm running out of names here.
Roshan
Parsa.
Foundation.
Parsa.
Parsa is no longer.
Iran
Yeah, it
Heritage.
morphed into Iran Heritage America. So there are some sources. It just it takes a kind of mobilization and effort that at times wears you down. And I still haven't figured out what the formula is, because there are some things that really galvanize the community, and they will come out and support it. And there are other things that are not that successful, and honestly, I wish I knew the formula. I actually know.
I mean, you have to plead, and then you have to cajole, and then you have to.
Grovel.
That's something I try. But I think that Bitarov is a really good example, because we've started to, we're in conversation with certain people. When you manifest it like this conference, it does get attention. And I think that there are a lot of people whose intentions are good, but they need to be educated about the needs of the community, and are maybe not as in touch as they could be. And quite frankly, I don't like to mince words. There are people that have an agenda, and there's a lot of self-aggrandizing that's at play. But even that can be. I try to look optimistically and say you can channel that in positive directions.
I also think, we're at this very critical moment where, Sepide talked about, or several people have talked about the difference between one generation and the other. And I think one of the things that I'm most happy about this conference is that we're together. And I think that's a really important thing, is that we recognize that there's a very common thread that runs between the generations. And I think in some ways we have to do more collaboration between those generations to help build even a bridge for the next generation, to recognize that we couldn't do this work today if it weren't for the sacrifices of many of those people who came from Iran. And, is Hamid here? He left. Okay, so one of the things that is really important about my little biography in this is that I met all these Iranians in 1986 when I graduated from Santa Cruz, and a lot of them were people who came here because they were persecuted politically in Iran, and they were the first people to kind of introduce Iranian art to me. Not the idea of Iran, art and politics and the fusion between them. And so in some ways I feel like that I pay homage to that generation, because in some ways their lives got interrupted very dramatically. And I think we also have to create this idea among wealthy Iranians, and that there's a lot of talk about art, but they don't often put their money where their mouth is. And none of you are in this room are probably those people, because you're here at this conference. But I think that's a really important thing to impress on them, that preservation of Iranian culture is not Cyrus the King statue, but preservation in the way that Kurosh Taghavi just spoke about. The idea that we really do have to kind of impress upon people who have resources. Like, you want to see Iranian art survive, in a way you have to support that innovation. And you know, I want to make a pitch again to support Bitaraf, for example. You know, like, that's an organ, you know, in the way that old leftists used to say, the organ of, and I mean it like it's the heart and the gut and the liver that keeps us going. So we have to support those organs. And Taraneh also is, for me, like an organ, because she does... Liver. Jigar. You know, her work of excavating these archives from the Confederation of Iranian Students, it is so interesting and so important that we kind of recognize that, like, in the basement of Parviz Shokat's house was these documents, and now it's kind of got a new life. So the idea of breathing life into those old things through organs like Bitaraf, I think, are really important. And so we have to kind of remember that, you know, it's not just recreating or remaking something. It's like they're already here. Darvag Theater is a jewel, right?
I just want to say one thing about Taraneh. I met the two new generation through Taraneh's work of
Through
the archive.
what we were doing, yeah.
I met Shadi, so I mean, Taraneh cultivated this whole, you know, so it's not about personally you, I'm saying, but
Right.
the work you're doing.
Because the need, as you were saying, the need is there. And whenever we've had an exhibition, we had an exhibition of Iranian artists in Iran at Intersection for the Arts, which is in San Francisco. And to date, that's been their largest, like, most written about, the largest audiences. And this is an organization that prides themselves in bringing in communities, you know, like they have huge audiences, but we've talked it all. They haven't been able to match it since 2009. So the need is definitely there, but I feel like, you know, most of the time I'm getting rejected by those larger organizations for funding, because they don't want to touch politics, they don't want to touch any conversation that goes any deeper than the surface, or talking about 3,000-year-old, you know, artifacts. So that's the challenge. I'd love to hear from everyone as to how to address that.
I think one of the, I'm sorry, I didn't even, just
No,
my
no,
mouth
please.
is running. But that element of educating, one of the donors I work with very closely, he doesn't like being told that this is art, or you know, so, you know, if you could also support this. But what I've realized over time, these conversations, which sometimes are really disappointing for both of us, I'm sure. But anyway, is that, you know, I'm not sure, and this is just making, is there a way in which we can do the educational piece better? Because he really genuinely is concerned about the politics of this. And I don't know how to unpack it for him, because I think that this, and every organization I belong to in Southern California says we do not do politics.
Yeah.
And yet, you know, this is one of the
We are
benefits.
here because of politics. I mean, I don't understand that at all.
So I think we have to somehow get at that and open that up. Yeah. So they feel that they are, you know, somehow I feel like, don't worry about it. You're not fomenting a revolution. Okay.